Uzbekistan, just to the southwest of the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. At liftoff time, the International Space Station will be 370 miles, statute miles, behind the Progress, but as the Progress climbs to orbit, the station will leapfrog past the rising Progress and Soyuz booster, and at third stage shutdown and space. The International Space Station will be just over 1,000 statute miles in front of the Progress. This is a very narrow phase angle, a narrow corridor that the Progress is launching into to try to accomplish this two-orbit rendezvous. As you are familiar with, there have been several four-orbit, 6-hour rendezvous for both Progress and Soyuz crewed vehicles over the past several years. The first of the crewed four-orbit rendezvous profiles occurring with the Soyuz TMA-08M crew of Pavel Vinogradov, Alexander Mazurkin, and Chris Cassidy back in March of 2013. It is hoped that the perfection of this two-orbit launch and rendezvous technique that is being employed this afternoon and in the early morning hours in Baikonur to deliver the Progress in less than 4 hours to the International Space Station will expedite the delivery of cargo and crew members in the future. The International Space Station, as we mentioned, will be over northern Uzbekistan at liftoff time. It will pass directly over the Baikonur Cosmodrome just 59 seconds after launch, and then again will pass the Progress and its Soyuz booster as the Soyuz climbs to orbit, an 8-minute, 45-second journey. At which point the Progress will separate from the third stage of this Soyuz booster, deploy its navigational antennas and solar arrays, and then begin a series of pre-programmed burns in order to reach the International Space Station. At the International Space Station at this moment, there are two Soyuz crew vehicles attached to various docking ports at the station and a Progress resupply craft that was launched several months ago. After Progress 70, the 70th Progress resupply ship, reaches the station within the next few hours, it will link up automatically to the Pirs docking compartment on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, putting two Soyuz vehicles and two Progress vehicles at the station. The plan is, following docking, which is scheduled at 8:39 p.m. Central Time tonight, 9:39 p.m. Eastern Time, the two cosmonauts on board the station, Oleg Artemyev and Sergei Prokopyev, who will be joined by Drew Feustel, the station commander. The rest of the crew is scheduled to be asleep during the latter phase of the rendezvous and docking operations tonight. They will begin a series of leak checks to make sure that we have an airtight seal at the docking interface at the Pirs docking compartment before the Russians open up the hatches to the Progress resupply vehicle late tonight to begin the unloading of some of the more time-critical cargo that is being carried to the station on board. Again, more than 5,600 pounds of cargo being delivered tonight to the International Space Station and the Expedition 56 crew. On board the International Space Station, again, the commander of Expedition 56 is NASA's Drew Feustel. He is joined by NASA astronauts Serena Aunin Chancellor and Ricky Arnold. The two cosmonauts we just mentioned on the far left, Oleg Gerst. Up on the 12.5-minute mark before launch. Again, the Soyuz was fueled several hours ago. All of the pre-launch preparations are going by the book. Within the next couple of minutes, the gyros on the Soyuz 2.1A booster will be placed in flight readiness. Flight recorders will be activated to provide launch and ascent data to the launch engineers at the blockhouse in Baikonur. One interesting operation that is scheduled for Tuesday, assuming a nominal launch and docking this evening for the Progress, will be the use of the Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo craft that arrived at the station several weeks ago for a reboost of the station. It is a test objective that has been approved by the International Partnership and the International Space Station Program. Northrop Grumman is all set to execute this test reboost that is scheduled for 3:25 p.m. Central Time on Tuesday, 4:25 p.m. Eastern Time. It will be a 60-second burn of the Cygnus's Delta Velocity engine, its main engine. That will increase the velocity of the station going uphill by 6/100ths of a meter per second, raising the station's orbit by just 361 feet. Again, a test objective that is planned for Tuesday afternoon at 3:25 p.m. Central Time, assuming a nominal launch and docking for the Progress this evening. The International Space Station is currently flying 258 statute miles over western Sudan, flying from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. Some of the pre-launch milestones in the last 10 minutes of the countdown will include a purge of nitrogen from the combustion chambers on the first stage of the Soyuz 2.1A booster at about the 4-minute mark before launch. There'll be the drain back of excess propellant from the first stage to make sure that the Soyuz has exactly enough fuel to make it for its 8-minute, 45-second ride to orbit. That will be followed at about the 2-minute, 45-second mark by the pressurization of the booster's propellant tanks and the termination of the ground propellant feed to the rocket. At the 1-minute mark, the booster will be placed on internal power, and then two critical events: the separation or retraction of two umbilicals that are buttressed up against the side of the Soyuz booster. The first umbilical will separate and retract at about the 35-second mark before launch, followed at about the 15-second mark by the second umbilical. That will initiate the launch command sequence, and the engine start sequence will begin at about the 12-second mark before liftoff. Inside 9 minutes before liftoff. Again, another attempt tonight by Russian flight controllers to send the Progress on a 2-orbit rendezvous, basically priority mail, to deliver almost 3 tons of cargo to the International Space Station in less than 4 hours. This technique will be tested several more times before a crew is committed to this launch profile of just 2 orbits. A 4-orbit, 6-hour rendezvous is planned for the next 2 crew launches coming up on October 11th and December 20th. Six and a half minutes until launch, everything continuing to proceed by the book. No problems reported down at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The International Space Station now flying over northern Saudi Arabia. Down in Baikonur, launch engineers report that a launch key has been inserted into a key to start mechanism that basically transitions the rest of the countdown into an automatic mode, very similar to what the ground launch sequencer used to do in the old space shuttle days. Flight recorders have now been activated. About a minute and a half away from the purging of nitrogen from the combustion chambers on the first stage of the 2.1A booster. The combustion chambers now have been purged of nitrogen. Next step will be the drain back of excess propellant. Coming up on the 4-minute mark until launch. Four minutes until launch. Countdown proceeding normally. A video feed of the countdown and what you're seeing on NASA television is being sent up to the crew on board the International Space Station. The station currently flying over northern Iran, about to cross the Caspian Sea. Propellant drain back has been completed. We're standing by for the pressurization of the propellant tanks. Two minutes, 45 seconds until launch. 2 minutes, 15 seconds. The booster's propellant tanks have been pressurized, standing by for the termination of the ground propellant feed and the vehicle being switched to internal power. Coming up on the 1 minute mark until launch. No issues being reported down in Baikonur. The vehicle is now on internal power. The next step will be the retraction of the first of the two umbilicals buttressed up against the Soyuz 2.1A booster. There's the separation of the first of the two umbilicals. The second umbilical now retracted, initiating the launch sequence, standing by for engine launch commanding. We have engine start. Turbo pumps up to flight speed. And liftoff. We have liftoff of the Progress resupply ship heading into the express lane bound for the International Space Station. Roll, pitch, and yaw program reported in good shape from the blockhouse down in Baikonur. Good vehicle stabilization. "45 seconds into the flight, engine chamber pressures are nominal. Yaw, pitch, and roll is nominal. This is animation based on telemetry being received back at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov. The flight is reported to be nominal. The vehicle passing now through maximum dynamic pressure. Parameters are normal on the vehicle. Good engine chamber pressures. All engines are in nominal shape according to the blockhouse in Baikonur as we come up on the 1 minute 30-second mark into the flight. The Soyuz booster and the Progress resupply craft traveling at 2,800 miles per hour, 15 miles downrange, an altitude of some 6.5 statute miles. And first stage separation is confirmed. The Soyuz booster's guidance system is now targeting for a precise window in space. The International Space Station has actually passed the Progress at this point, en route to its nominal orbit, as the Progress now is chasing the International Space Station. Coming up on the 2 minute 45-second point into the flight, we'll be standing by for shroud jettison. that will expose the Progress vehicle to the dynamics of space travel. And we have launch shroud jettison confirmed. The vehicle is reported to be very stable, good engine performance. Coming up on the 3.5-minute mark into the flight. Stage 2 engine is working as advertised. The Soyuz booster traveling over 6,000 miles an hour, 66 miles in altitude, 125 miles downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. The second stage engine on the Progress booster, the Soyuz 2.1A booster, is operating normally. We are expecting second stage shutdown at about the 4-minute, 47-second mark into the flight. Pitch, yaw, and roll performance is good. Very stable vehicle, reported by flight controllers. Coming up on the 4-minute, 45-second mark into the flight, standing by for second stage shutdown. And we have second stage shutdown. Third stage is burning. The third stage on the Soyuz booster will operate for about 4 minutes until it delivers the Progress into its preliminary orbit at the 8-minute, 45-second mark into the flight. And again, at the time of third stage shutdown and spacecraft separation, the Progress will be about 1,000 miles behind the International Space Station. The station will be traveling 258 statute miles over southeastern Russia at that point, just north of its border with Mongolia. Five minutes, 45 seconds into the flight, 3 minutes of powered flight remaining, everything looking great. The third stage engine continues to burn as advertised. No issues reported. Coming up on the 6.5-minute mark into the flight. The Soyuz booster and its Progress cargo ship traveling almost 12,000 miles an hour, 120 miles in altitude, 587 miles downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Seven minutes into the flight, 1 minute, 45 seconds of powered flight remaining. Third stage engine continues to fire normally. Good vehicle stabilization reported. Just a few seconds after the Progress separates from the third stage, the automatic command will be issued to deploy its solar arrays and navigational antennas as it begins a quick two-orbit journey to reach the International Space Station this evening. 7 minutes, 45 seconds into the flight, 1 minute of powered flight remaining. The Soyuz booster is rock steady according to the flight controllers. About 15 seconds of powered flight remaining. The Soyuz booster in the Progress traveling more than 17,000 miles an hour. Standing by for third stage shutdown and spacecraft separation, which we now have. Spacecraft separation is confirmed. Standing by for confirmation of solar array and navigational antenna deploy. And now we have confirmation that all of the structures have deployed normally. Solar arrays and navigational antennas are out. A perfectly normal ascent. Third time was a charm as the Soyuz booster lifted off on time at 4:51 and 34 seconds p.m. Central Time, 3:51 and 34 seconds a.m. in Baikonur on Tuesday morning. An 8-minute, 45-second ride to deliver the Progress resupply craft and almost 3 tons of food, fuel, and supplies into its preliminary orbit. Now the chase begins to catch up to the International Space Station. Docking now is scheduled just 3 hours and 37 minutes from now at 8:39 p.m. Central Time. There's our first view from the external television camera on the Progress. You'll be seeing that again later this evening when the Progress arrives in the vicinity of the International Space Station. Both the Progress and the station are currently flying over eastern Russia, about to begin a northwest to southeast trajectory that will carry it over both craft over the Japanese island chain and out over the North Pacific. The values that you're seeing on the screen from the engineering overlay on the external camera on the Progress craft, in the lower left-hand corner, you see 2 values, km and meters per second in Cyrillic. That will ultimately show the distance between the Progress and the Pirs docking compartment, its ultimate destination on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, and the meters per second will ultimately reflect its rate of closure for contact and capture. Once again, you're looking at a view from a balcony camera that is mounted over the large flight control room at the Russian Mission Control Center in the town of Korolyov on the outskirts of Moscow. Russian flight controllers there, now in control of the rest of the mission of the Progress vehicle for its planned automated docking to the Pirs docking compartment on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the station. That docking is scheduled less than 3.5 hours from now. That'll wrap up our launch coverage, a perfect launch, Third time was a charm to place the Progress resupply vehicle into a 2-orbit rendezvous profile. It will reach the station within the next few hours. We'll be back on the air at 8 p.m. Central Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our docking coverage, with link up of the Progress to the Piers docking compartment planned at 8:39 p.m. Central, 9:39 p.m. Eastern Time. For now, that'll wrap up our coverage. This is Mission Control Houston.